Hello and welcome to episode 10 of Dormroom Diplomacy. My name's Jack. I'm joined as usual by Mr. Matthew Nelson.
Howdy, howdy. How's everything been going?
It's been going pretty well. Back to the usual setup, you know.
Absolutely.
Back in the comfort zone. Although I did have a very nice weekend.
I'm sure you did.
Exploring downtown Chicago. Back in the dorm. A little disappointed by the food options I have here. A little disappointed by the sleeping arrangements. But we will persevere. I feel we'll be just fine.
You'll make it through? Are you sure you're gonna make it, dude? Are you sure?
Yes. I think that this can be the if this is the battle that I have to take, I'm gonna be all just right.
Fine. Mm-hmm.
But I think that for today we wanted to rehash a little bit one of the fabled lost episodes that we so unfortunately are unable to air. I did post a picture up on the Instagram, on the Dormroom Diplomacy Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
If anyone wants to go check that out, you could see what the setup looks like. It was pretty nice. It would have been a great couple episodes, but unfortunately,
alas, we're not
exactly.
Smart.
Here we are, unintelligent as per usual. What can you do about it? Move forward.
A whole lot of nothing.
So I actually might start recording over there and bring, just my actual camera and mic over there. And
be a
just
lot
run
of
it.
work to set it up every time, but
Not too much. It could be. I mean, could introduce a whole new slew of technical difficulties, but we'll see.
We'll see.
Just to mix up the background instead of the
for sure
good old dorm room. But hey, got to keep it classic.
Got to keep it classic, exactly.
Of course. But moving on, and it's going to get a great bit more serious because today what we're talking about is the conflict in Ukraine. Everyone's familiar. If you aren't, I mean, I got nothing for you. You. But everyone's familiar to varying degrees of what's going on. Obviously, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And this has been going on for a little bit over 8 months, I believe, at this point.
It's been quite a while. A while.
Everyone's seen stuff on social media, whether it be, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, all that. And it's kind of just novel in that this conflict is the first global conflict to be presented to the, to the whole global populace, if words will work.
Because kind of an anecdotal, thing that I have is that how I first learned about it was, watching the coverage on, live on Twitch, not live on, standard news or whatever it may be, your ABCs, your whatever. I saw it live on Twitch, which is kind of crazy.
It's very unprecedented how just widely aware everyone has become of this. And not just with conflicts in the past, even modern conflicts. If you take the conflict in the Middle East, for example, everyone's aware of what's happening.
Right.
But, there's not a whole lot of information available, and you don't really get to have that lens into what's really going on.
Exactly.
But with how widely available this was on social media, it just kind of showed everyone exactly what was going on. The day-to-day of even soldiers over there, of people.
Right. Mm-hmm. And that's become that's become a popular subculture of just, entertainment as well. The life of a soldier and the life of that kind of stuff, which is kind of stemmed from this, I think.
I know. It's developed in a really weird way and, is kind of both interesting but also kind of perverse in a way where it's
oh yeah, totally,
this is just so strange to be seeing. And even before it was conflict stuff, obviously that's awful to see, and even for it to be spread, yes, you want awareness and all that, but for just everyone who's on social media to be able to see, what's going on, I think obviously spread a lot of awareness, helped, a lot of people become knowledgeable on what's going on over there, and rallied a lot of support behind these people who it was like, for anyone living in another like first world country, it's like, these people are just like me, they're just, they're posting about this on social media just like I would, like, this is like something serious, which like is kind of sad because there's been so many conflicts even in modern time where just because it hasn't been so widely publicized, it kind of flies under the radar.
Right.
Yeah. Even if they are just as serious, and many of them are.
And, here in America, the news is pretty transparent about when things are happening. They might not be transparent about the details, but like we know when things are happening. It's not the same way in other countries.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And I think a big thing as well that just kind of created the divide where a lot of people now look to certain social media outlets as their source of news is just because, mainstream media has become just, it's very much to drive clicks and to drive engagement and to get you to interact. And that kind of comes at the cost of losing some of the, the factual statements that need to be made, the details, maybe quote unquote less interesting stuff, but nonetheless, it's the very important stuff. Whereas, for social media, it can be published at such a rapid rate that you just get all the details, all the information, regardless of whether it's, headlining news, I guess.
It happens to be more, first-hand details as well.
Yeah, and it's a lot more personal.
And exactly. It can be more biased. However, there's so many perspectives because of the amount of people, like you said, large amounts of content being produced. So
yeah, of course.
It's like, you're getting, information from the forefront of what's happening, and it's just there's no production cycle.
And especially when it's so many people, like, you think about the details in the news you're going to get from a production team where it's being channeled through all of these people, and then eventually you have like a couple people that are going to end up talking about it, as opposed to hundreds of thousands of individual accounts, sharing a unique and individual perspective, and then you can kind of stitch those together to, create your overall conclusion, which is very, and that's how people should come to create their, not just conclusions, but their ideas on what's going on in the world is, not just to take one source of information and just, take it as dogma and begin, telling everyone that that's the truth
based off of that.
Like it's important.
You should be diversified in your, news, viewing, because
everyone
this is
has
gonna turn into the conversation of general that like get your sources from multiple places. But.
Exactly. And like, even for our like every form of media, I guess, that's presenting ideas to people, podcasts included, this podcast included, any human being has their own individual perceptions, and they're going to take events, things that are going on, and even presenting, with facts and hard data, there's going to be, ways that they, attempt to persuade you, even if not directly, just because of underlying perceptions. Yeah. And it's not a, inherently bad thing, but it is something that is inherent. Like it's,
and you have to be
a fact of the matter
as well. You have to be aware of it, and being aware of it is the best, best way to not combat it, because, it's just the best way to solidify your own personal beliefs.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
But, moving on to more of the, meat of the topic, I'm sure we'll do an episode in future more about the ways that social media is kind of changing our world and such. But a couple weeks ago, just about just about a couple weeks ago, there was an address by President Biden to the nation discussing the criticality of, the use of nuclear weapons in this combat. Now, that's a word that doesn't get tossed around very often.
Yeah.
And causes a lot of, terror when it does, innately as it should. But it was definitely a very chilling moment to have a president on national news come up and be like, yeah, the nuclear, threat right now is higher than it's been since the 60s.
Yeah, and I think
I don't know the validity of that, but
I think the general idea around the whole nuclear threat, and what a lot of people believe, which I would certainly like to believe and believed for a while, is that okay, take a nuclear conflict. If you pit any of the large world powers against each other in nuclear conflict, it's going to just, absolutely, I mean, it's going to destroy the world.
It's going to end in mutual destruction.
Yes, there will be no winner. No one wins in nuclear conflict if both sides are, even if one side is armed, no one wins in nuclear conflict.
Right.
Even, the two examples of, nuclear weapons being utilized in history. Obviously, yes, it allowed, the United States to win a war. But that being said, it's something that has carried on, consequentially to this day, and is still something that, people have to deal with.
Yeah. What is the concept of winning when devastation is so mutual that...
Right, exactly.
Are you really, you're just destroying everything that you've come to create.
Yeah, and then at this point in time, it's no longer within that context because there's enough nations in the world that are nuclearly armed on, all sides of certain political ideologies that any escalation of conflict, just inevitably leads to pretty much world destruction.
Right.
Or at least the destruction of significant world powers.
I was doing a little bit of research, and obviously, President being in America, being the commander in chief of the U.S., Army, military, so on and so forth, has that decision to make. And I was just doing some research, and it would be such an insane situation if you were that person. Because if America were under fire, right, or you would have 40 minutes to decide. 40 minutes to decide before impact. And I just found that to be, wow.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's not even a decision that can be made. And I think everyone's general perception of it was, okay, yes, all these countries are nuclearly armed. Sure, it's possible that a conflict can escalate into the utilization of these weapons, but just because of how catastrophic it would be for everyone involved, I think everyone, myself included, generally just believed, okay, well, it's not going to escalate at all. There's no point. No one wins. Why would anyone? It would just destroy your country, in every facet. It just is shouldn't even be an option. Why would you want to resort to that?
However, that leads us into the discussion because
big however.
We have a situation where things break those logic rules.
Certainly. And so I think the big thing that everyone, needs to think about is kind of what's been going on between both the media, foreign leaders, and Mr. Putin, Mr. Vladimir Putin, over in Russia. Essentially what's going on is this conflict has escalated up to this point, right? And every step of the way, there have been multiple options for peaceful settlements of this conflict. Now, I want to make it clear that all of these settlements, all these agreements, any compromise that could be made is not ideal, okay?
And oftentimes it resulted in, loss of Ukrainian land.
The important distinction to make is that there have not been, there is not, and there will not be any ideal or perfect solutions to this problem. Such with any large political problem, or not even political, but even just a problem concerning two humans, okay? Because human nature is awful, and we all like to take advantage of each other.
Absolutely.
And so what it comes down to is, with there being no perfect solutions, a lot of people go, okay, well, there's no good solution. We just have to hold out. We just gotta, call the bluff, wait it out. He won't, launch nuclear weapons. Or, if we're looking at the conflict earlier on, he won't invade Ukraine. Oh, he won't invade more of Ukraine. Oh, he won't cut off, oil from Europe. Oh, all these things. Just calling his bluff, giving Putin a little more leeway, and just saying that because the idea that, opposing in this, opposing Putin when it comes to the invasion of Ukraine or this or that, would lead to conflict, or would lead to, the loss of American lives, or, once a part of Ukraine has been captured, trying to capture that back, or even coming to the peaceful settlement of allowing that part to be, taken annexed into Russia. Right. These are all, proposed solutions, and the reason none of them came to fruition is because people looked at the, situation and said, this is not ideal. People are getting harmed. We can't do this. This is, this isn't good.
Right.
And the only important thing that needs to be thought about, and frankly should have been thought about, is the fact that, like I said, with no ideal solutions, that does not mean there are no solutions. And that does not mean that there is not a best solution. In all scenarios, regardless of whether there are varying degrees of, harm to certain groups of people or an individual or whatever it may be, there are best case scenarios.
Right.
And I'm not saying they're perfect. They never will be. That's human nature. The reality of dealing with conflict is that there will never be perfect scenarios. The nature of conflict implies that, harm will be done to one or both parties involved. And so it's just kind of astounded me that we've gotten to this point where everyone believes that, if we just wait, there's going to be some perfect solution, that flies over the horizon and presents itself to us that we can then execute.
Meanwhile, the Ukrainians are still battling, with American equipment and, resources from other countries. And there's still a large loss of life on both sides. And
we're just, all parties involved in this conflict are, shoving resources into it, whether it be, lives of soldiers or equipment or financial assistance, or even on the Russian side, also resources being invested into this. And we're continuing to just build and build and build and build and escalate this conflict with no end in sight. And the only end in sight is nuclear conflict. And the thing that makes me, because like I said before, I always thought, it's nuclear conflict is something that's so serious that it will never escalate to that because no one wins in that situation. I did think that before, and I am becoming more and more concerned because what I worry about is Putin is not a sane person. He is not he does not care about the preservation of human life. He cares about himself, about the, preservation of his dictatorship in Russia.
Of his authority. Exactly.
Precisely. Now, that being said, he's not an idiot. He's not dumb. And he's not, he's a very calculated person who has been doing this for years and has maintained his power with, an iron fist. For lack of better terminology,
if you don't have that type of power, you're gonna lose it.
His entire country despises him, except for those that benefit from his rule, which is a very select few. and he still is able to maintain power. An idiot is not able to do that.
Right.
And so what's been going on is, I guess, mainstream media, I don't even know if that's the right term, but just the general public perception that's been presented to the public of Putin for the longest time throughout this conflict was that he's just this crazed madman, this butcherer. He's just killing women and children. He's just murdering all over the place. And then, as soon as nuclear conflict is presented as, a possible ends to this conflict, he's just presented, oh no, he's a smart guy. He won't do that. That's not.
No one could do that. No one could go that far.
Yeah, and the problem I'm having with that is where's the justification for this coming from, aside from the double standard? Because that's just
how the media works.
Yeah, just have to accept it at that point. Yeah. No, it is.
It's pretty bad. But
I've come to expect it. But aside from that, where is this coming from? Because if you're painting, Putin as this crazy, madman who doesn't care, just this lifeless soul.
But he won't use nuclear weapons.
Yeah, why? Why would he not? Okay, and the reason I want to, pose this question is because, if we take the ramp of this conflict and every little step we've been taking to escalate this conflict and refusing, the United States has refused to settle peacefully on any of these occasions. I want to make that clear. There's been multiple, opportunities for peaceful settlements to be had. Are they perfect? No, they're not. And often ended in the loss of Ukrainian land to be annexed into Russia. And yes, I know this is not that's not ideal. But again, you have to look at the best case of, whether it be lives on all sides of the conflict. Not that, obviously you want to preserve Ukrainian lives, you want to preserve American lives.
Right.
The furthering of this conflict does neither. Not that, but what I think it's important to note is that as we continue to escalate this conflict, we're not giving any off-ramps to Putin. We're not giving any options for a peaceful settlement. And if we continue to do so, Putin doesn't care about, even his life, other people's life. I don't think.
Right.
And if he gets backed into a corner, what is there for him to lose?
Exactly.
I don't think people realize, but if the people, I think the general perception is that if we hold out long enough, we'll be able to, take Putin out of power. Like
we've been holding out for how many years now?
Yeah. This has been going on since the Cold War.
Right.
And so I think what people think, the general perception, or at least what it seems to be, is that people believe that Putin can be taken out of power. If we continue to hold out, if we continue to push this and not allow him to make any or have any leverage, make any progress on his agendas, that eventually he'll run out of resources, he'll run out of support.
And he'll just turn over.
He'll just, or we can go in, forcefully remove him, something like that, take Putin out of power.
Right.
What I don't think people realize is that all that Putin has is his power. The only thing that he has to live for is his authority and his rule in Russia.
He's made that clear, too.
If he loses that, if he is to be taken out of power, you look at how much a majority of his country despises him. Even when rallying support, even with all the propaganda and the media persuasion that goes on in, a country like that.
Which is a topic of a whole nother thing.
Certainly. He still was unable to gain large amounts of support.
Exactly.
You saw the Russian mothers crying out against, the draft that came up.
Right.
To gather troops for the force to invade Ukraine and all these things, and people have overwhelmingly been against what Putin is trying to do, especially once they found out the reality of what was going on.
And to those people as well, inside the Russian tactics and the Russian, offensive has not turned out so well.
No, it really hasn't. And that, again, it certainly hurts morale a great deal.
And it's somewhat surprising. I think to the world it was somewhat surprising, being a massive, or supposedly massive, wartime power. Kind of surprising. So
it did certainly catch me off guard.
When you put Putin in a position where he can't win what he wants in a ground-based tactics battle, but he has access to nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't he make that decision?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to remember that he does not care. He is a cold-blooded murderer. Like, I want to make that clear. Awful person. And when you back someone like that into a corner, there is no other option.
Right.
It is not an option for him in his circumstance with how things have developed to lose power. If he loses power, he dies. I mean, sure, maybe he just gets held in a prison for the remainder of his life, but I would imagine that he would just rather, go out in a fiery bang. And I don't think people realize, but that fiery bang isn't, suicide or some personal exit for him. It's, nuclear conflict.
And then the other thing is, in the moment when bombs rain down on Kiev, who does Ukraine turn to in that moment? And that becomes the next moral problem and the next issue, because Ukraine as an entity does not have the power to fight this war on a nuclear front.
No, it does not. And that's why it astounds me that the people in charge of, let's say, foreign policy, of, conducting, I guess, the plan on how to deal with this conflict. It was inevitable that Russia was going to invade Ukraine. Putin has made it clear that he had ambitions to annex, parts of Ukraine back into Russia. Certainly the Donbass region, parts of Crimea, just stuff that had been a part of the Soviet Union. And this was made extremely clear. So for anyone that was caught off guard by that, I mean, he was blatantly just blunt about what his intentions were.
What set off this chain of events, again, was the, steps towards Ukraine entering the, NATO.
Right, exactly.
NATO. And it was made, explicitly clear, like you were saying, that was part of the conditionals. And
yeah, I mean, Putin. Yeah,
can Ukraine belong in NATO? Sure. Is that something we're arguing? No. However, was this a conditional on Russian invasion? Kind of. And I don't know.
I don't want to argue whether Ukraine should or shouldn't be a part of NATO, because frankly, I mean, it does matter. Obviously, it's certainly important to promote the expansion of the free world. Stop the spread of communism, which is a large, I guess, purpose of that. Federation, if you will. But it was just made abundantly clear that if Ukraine were to join NATO, that Russia would invade.
Right.
And then Ukraine wanted to join NATO, Russia invaded, and everyone goes, "Oh shit, where did this come from?"
Right. No, this was out in the open. It was made very clear in not only like Russian media, everywhere media. And
And so I think it's, and kind of like you were saying earlier, it's a very difficult moral situation, because let's take the point of view of the United States and look at that and say, okay, Russia has invaded Ukraine. This is a problem. And frankly, I do believe that as a premier world power, that the United States is obligated to step in and to help these, less abled nations, especially when it comes to, matters of these, autocratic, I guess, like, Russia, a communist nation. invading, expanding their territory, similarly to China, and as I would imagine, their planned intentions within the invasion of Taiwan. And it's important to stop this spread, like it's been throughout history, a primary motivation of the United States. That's not really what I'm arguing. I do think that that is important. And I think there's a certain moral obligation there, especially with, a country like the United States, where I think it's important to kind of make a distinction between that and once the conflict has escalated, it becomes a little bit different. Certainly at the point we are now, but I do believe leading up to this point that there's a time when you have to come to make the decision that it is time to either exit the conflict or search for a peaceful, ends to what's going on.
Right.
Because it just has come to a point now that we're running out. I mean, we either are out of or are running out of peaceful options to end this conflict.
And the other terrifying thing, and this is developing news as we spoke, you mentioned it very briefly, but we could be adding another conflict to our global conflicts with China and Taiwan. No one seemed to take note of it. Widespread news seemed to just completely ignore the fact that there was a Chinese summit some amount of days ago that discussed the full control and power taking over Hong Kong and their plans in future to take Taiwan as a main entity China structure.
And like I said previously, I believe that it is very important for all world powers, democratic world powers in the free world, to prevent the spread of communism. Could not be more of a believer in that. And so, that's certainly important, especially when looking at the Russian invasion of Ukraine. You can look at it in terms of, okay, if Russia does that, then you could say that, and if the U.S. were to allow it and say, we can't do much about it, then China's going to look at it and be like, oh, okay, well, we can just go invade Taiwan and take control of that, or on a smaller scale like Hong Kong. And a precedent needs to be set, certainly, and I'm not really arguing against that. What I am saying is that escalating this conflict in the way that it has been done does not lead anywhere good for any party involved.
Right.
And like I said, again and again, I can't stress enough that there is no perfect solution, and it just needed to be a realistic decision needed to be made that peacefully settled the conflict. And frankly, what that probably ended up meaning is small parts of Ukraine annexed into Russia. And I don't know. I'm not a foreign diplomat. I don't know the inner workings of foreign policy. But at the same time, people seem to be looking at Putin, calling the bluff of, surely this won't escalate. I don't think people, take into consideration that all Putin has is his authority and his claim to power. And if we continue, to kind of just tighten our grasp and push him further and further into the corner, when he runs into that corner, there's no good options for anywhere. And so,
and this is not designed. This discussion is not designed to scare people, but we need to be aware of it, especially as it continues to develop in the ways that it is.
And there's nothing any of us can really do about how this is going to develop. It's largely out of most people's control. Even a lot of foreign relations and foreign diplomats don't have a great degree of control over this.
Right. And it's just going to end up pretty bad, because if that is what this ends up going towards, because not only is it going to be a battle between, probably America and Russia, possibly China getting involved, so on and so forth. But there's going to be a lot of, smaller entities getting caught in the crossfire that just don't have anything to do with this conflict. And I was really thinking to myself, and like, if this was planned to be a slow burner war, right? Like, if this was going to go really slow, how was Russia planning on, damaging America and American, society? And I don't know the, validity and so on and how far this whole claim is going, but I heard through the secondary media and stuff that there's certain, ideas of a new joint currency between Russia and China, backed by the gold standard similar to the American dollar. And I was thinking, I don't know how it would be a long road to getting mutual acceptance of such a currency, but it could be a plans towards, economic warfare in a way that totally destroys the American dollar's value.
Yeah. I mean, they're both enormous entities financially and just in terms of a global presence. And so you can't, discount the power that they have in, like you said, in global economics. And I also think that there's much more communication and collaboration between Russia and China than many people think, which certainly is not a good thing.
No,
and
not at all.
So I do think that the general idea, kind of going back to what you were saying, obviously, this isn't meant to scare anyone, nor am I, necessarily scared. Do I think that if things are to escalate, it's going to go very poorly? Yes. Can any of us do anything about that? No. Frankly, I don't think. And maybe I'm just saying this just because I, hope it doesn't, but I genuinely don't believe that it will escalate to the point of nuclear conflict. I just think that surely everyone is, too concerned with preserving, their nation economically or
their nations, the world.
Just
there's so many different implications.
Everything. So I do seriously think that it will not escalate to that point. I just want to make it clear that especially now, there needs to be some kind of solution. And people just seem to be waiting and waiting and waiting for, this ideal solution to emerge when it's just not the nature of these type of conclusions.
Right. And putting yourself in the position of the Ukrainian president or in the position of his advisors and so forth, what, in your opinion, do you think prevented them from going with, a solution that perhaps, ended in the annexation of some land, but also ended in less lives being lost?
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of have to look at it two ways. If you look at it from the perspective of, like President Zelensky and, the Ukrainian people, they were and are doing pretty well in the war.
Exactly.
That's the thing. They were able to defend their land very well from a very poorly prepared, Russian offensive. So I completely, stand by their decision of, okay, if we're being invaded and we're doing this well against Russia.
And it wasn't like Ukraine was prepared either. Like to an extent for a full war like this.
No, I completely understand why they continued to fight and didn't look for a treaty. I mean, they were doing better. Just look at, the power that a country like Ukraine should have compared to that of Russia. They were doing extraordinarily well.
Right.
That being said, thousands of lives were lost, and it was an awful, awful conflict. So
it's still a capturing of land right now. It's a back and forth still.
Right. And I'm sure that there were peace settlements on the table, but I certainly understand why they were not interested in taking any of that, because obviously they wanted to preserve, their nation and their sovereignty. And so the other point of view that I think is important to look at is kind of that of the United States, but also just kind of the Western world, the free world, whatever you want to call it. Most of the countries in NATO, frankly. And obviously, it's important to support a country like Ukraine being invaded. I mean, that's just a primary, even though they weren't a part of NATO, like,
right.
It's just I do think it's a moral obligation of countries like the United States
to support.
Yeah, and especially if it's an invasion by a communist country.
Right.
That being said, where does the line get drawn? Because, you can send financial help, you can send weaponry, and then what's next? Are you sending troops? Are you sending nuclear bombs? Like, it's just, a line hasn't been drawn, and it's unclear. It's been made unclear where exactly the United States stands. And there's been statements made where, Biden comes out and says, oh, this will not be tolerated. We're, drawing the line here, and this is, we're going to support Ukraine up until this point. But none of that, none of the statements have any holding power or any meaning, because it's just, And so I have a hard time seeing how these countries, the United States included, have kind of rationalized their positions when it comes to this conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm interested to see, I guess, where they're going to draw the line, because certainly it will not be a different nation to pull the trigger.
No, absolutely
that's impossible. And so I don't know where the line gets drawn, because it wasn't
extraordinarily improbable.
Yeah, there hasn't been any cutoff up to this point. Support has been continued. Whether that's, a good or bad decision, I'm not really one to say. I think personally, I think it's important to support, countries being invaded, especially by a communist nation.
Right.
But that being said, regardless of the support, or whether you believe in the support or not, or to the degree, a line needs to be drawn of how involved, let's use the United States as the example, how involved the United States is going to be in said conflict. Up until this point, very involved, but not to the point of,
sending
mounting their own offensive again.
Right.
And so where does the line get drawn?
Exactly. And I think that for once, the U.S. has done a decent job of keeping their word when it comes to not providing troops and not, creating a counteroffensive.
Yeah.
There's still been a lot of resources and U.S. resources sunk into it. Now, is that a good or a bad thing? Like you were saying, that's up to you. That's up to the the viewer's discretion and your decision. I agree. I think that it's part of it's part of America's whole founding concept that we fundamentally disagree with the idea of communism, and fighting communist nations or supporting people that are in conflict with communist nations is one of our pillars. And one of the things I think that you're talking on more of like a higher level thinking, more of a president in like a presidential way. I think one of the other things that's kind of influenced the success of Ukraine is the social patriotism that's happened across.
Oh yeah, I mean they've just had tremendous support from the entire world, pretty much, because of how publicized this has become.
And from a soldier's perspective, what's more motivating than the entire world, the entire free world saying, hey, we support you. Like, there's quite literally nothing more motivating.
No, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you look at it, comparing the two sides, where you have, soldiers in Russia, people are breaking their arms to avoid being drafted, and, there's outcry against this, happening, and people don't support the invasion. And then you compare that to that of Ukraine, where the entire free world is cheering for you, from your phone in your pocket.
That you can see at any point in time.
Yeah, I mean, how could that go any other way, frankly? So
right, it's, and I think from a little bit more of a desire to fight, a desire to win. That's where some of the the force is coming from. And President Zelensky has also had a large presence on social media as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that also had a little bit of an impact.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's war, it's awful, but I mean, just terrible, the lives being lost, even on all sides of the conflict. But it's just been kind of extraordinary to see the amount of support from people across the globe, just because of how widely, publicized this has been. And it is just very strange, frankly, I remember back when this was first starting, seeing videos on social media of bombs and like you think of that and I'm like, oh, this is a clip from a movie or something, or no, it's happening in the world.
It's hard to quantify this, like, is this in your head and comprehend this video of air raid sirens going off and fiery hellfire coming down upon populated areas, and it's still continuing as there were attacks on Kiev recently.
And I mean, I just think it's just a big reason why there's so much support, because people see that and they're like, oh, this person's just like me, and they're just video from outside their house, but there's bombs in the sky, and you think about that and you can't even, if you're living in America, you can't even imagine something like that. And I think that's just why there's such a large outcry of support for these people, because you just felt a certain degree of empathy because of the similarity.
And it's also another kind of, like, the internet itself is kind of tends to censor itself, and this was one of those examples of where it was really shown in just full detail how terrible the crisis was. And I think it also, which is kind of a topic for something else, but it shows the power of the collective, the collective social being. And
certainly
it while it's, like you said, terrible and awful, it's also a very interesting example of the power of social media and collective, the collective social brain, for lack of better terms.
Yeah, I mean, depending on which way that social brain that you're talking about is persuaded, I mean, just look at the consequences it can have. So obviously it can be an extraordinarily good thing in this case, but you would imagine that it could be extraordinarily bad given different circumstances. So
it could be definitely very positive, or it could be turned into social brainwashing in a different situation. And
and I think there's examples of both cases even today.
In history. Oh yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah, I think that about wraps it up. I do just want to kind of end it on the happy note of there's nothing we can do, There's not, I mean, maybe that's not a happy note. Maybe that's just pessimism and but there's, it's important to continue to be optimistic, because, there's nothing any of us can do. And I do genuinely think that it's highly unlikely that any of this escalates. But you never know. And I'm watching closely. I want to see how these next steps are taken, because everyone's certainly treading very lightly right now to try to come to a resolution here. So we'll see it pan out. And I just hope that this can be resolved.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you entirely. It's a tale for the future to tell, and all we can hope is that our foreign policymakers and diplomats will, come to the correct conclusions and correct decisions.
Or at least, I'm sure they won't be the correct ones, but at least not the worst ones. Can we at least hope for that, guys?
Yeah. Whatever they might be.
That would be nice. That would be nice.
That would.
But
yeah.
Yeah. Thanks again for everyone. Yeah, for tuning in as usual. I'm not going to plug too many of the social medias. The drill. But we are posting short form content now. Go check it out on all the social media platforms. can find the links. Get little snippets of us throughout the day.
Exactly.
Talking about whatever it may be. So keep an eye out for that. But yeah, we appreciate the support as always, and we'll see you guys next time.
See ya.
Peace.